This will be the third and final presentation on the executive branch, and the essential question for this section on the federal bureaucracy will be, how is the federal bureaucracy organized to serve Americans, and how do federal agencies carry out their missions? So the cabinet departments make up the federal bureaucracy, or at least part of the federal bureaucracy, and those agencies are staffed by people called bureaucrats. And often this is a negative term for all of the red tape or paperwork or hoops you have to jump through to get something done in the government. Usually bureaucracy has a negative connotation, but it really is just the parts of the executive branch that work to get things done. A secretary who is a member of the president's cabinet heads each of the departments in the executive branch. So they're the heads of this bureaucracy in a lot of ways. The chart on the right, even though it may be hard to see, just kind of shows you how much is in the executive branch compared to the other two, how many different corporations and the cabinet members and all those things. So it kind of shows you the complexity of the executive branch. While it is simple that mainly it's the office of the president, there are many of these different organizations that fit underneath there. In addition to those cabinet departments, there are many agencies that increase the size of the federal bureaucracy, and we'll talk about those in the following slides. One example of how this bureaucracy gets so big is just looking at the Homeland Security Department here. They control the Coast Guard, the Border Patrol, Immigration and Naturalization Services, which is the INS, and Customs Services, and many other agencies. As you can see there, there's the Secretary of Homeland Security, and then just all the things that fall under there. There's a science and technology portion, there's information analysis and infrastructure protection. So just different things in there. Just in one department, these are all the different things, and think of how many staff members are needed to staff all these sections. This is just one department, and there are things even outside of those cabinet departments. So this just gives you a look at how big this federal bureaucracy can become. Outside of those 13 departments, there are what are called independent agencies. The federal bureaucracy includes more than 100 independent agencies as well that aren't a part of those cabinet positions. Some independent agencies, like the Central Intelligence Agency and the General Services Administration, perform services for the executive branch. So the CIA isn't only in the executive branch, but it's one of those independent agencies that can work with the executive branch, giving intelligence and different military services to the executive branch. Some independent agencies, such as the United States Postal Service, are called government corporations, and they serve the public directly. So when you drop something in the mail, they're working with you directly, and it's a government corporation. And so it's a very unique part of the government bureaucracy, but there are different ways in which you deal with them that make them like a corporation, but they're owned by the government. There are also regulatory commissions. Independent regulatory commissions were created to make rules for large industries and businesses that affect the public. Business lobbyists often pressure regulatory agencies. So these are things like the Food and Drug Administration, or different things that make sure corporations aren't just doing whatever they want in producing products or making medicine or things like that. These regulatory agencies take care of that. And lobbyists for those businesses, like drug companies or agricultural companies, will seek to change laws through some of these regulatory commissions. In recent years, Congress has responded to complaints of overregulation by trying to deregulate or reduce the powers of regulatory agencies. So there's a big push lately to deregulate all of what's known as that bureaucracy or red tape, and reduce the power of these agencies in different parts of life. The origins of this bureaucracy and how it gets staffed more specifically, there was originally a spoils system that was much more prevalent. Today it's still used in some ways, but the spoils system is the practice of victorious politicians rewarding their followers with government jobs. This fostered and does foster sometimes still inefficiency and corruption. So it used to be that all of these organizations and all of these agencies were filled by the president or a senator or different people who won elections. They would often appoint all the people who got them there to those positions. The civil service system is the principle and practice of government employment on the basis of open, competitive exams and merit. So different civil service positions take people who are more qualified. It's more like a normal employment system, but a lot of times there are exams. One example, again, would be like the CIA. There are certain exams. The FBI is another similar example, but this is a much more fair and balanced system than the spoils system and is more commonly used today. These federal agencies can influence policy as well. Federal agencies help enforce laws by issuing rules and regulations designed to translate the law into action. Again, those agencies that regulate food and drug production and health issues a lot of times translate laws about health and wellness into action. In 1995, a law was enacted to reduce the amount of federal paperwork created by these regulations. Again, that's that negative side of paperwork, bureaucracy, red tape to cut through. They're just trying to lessen the amount of that type of paperwork. The bureaucracy shapes public policy in several ways by helping draft new bills for Congress, testifying about legislation, and providing lawmakers with technical information. Again, like that Office of the President, these things help just give information, do all the day-to-day tasks that politicians can't do themselves. By deciding disputes over how a law or set of rules should be applied, again, different agencies can help settle these disputes. And by providing top political decision makers with information and advice. This is where those scientists, social scientists, statisticians give information to lawmakers about things coming up and giving them more information to work with. There are several reasons that the size and importance of federal bureaucracy has grown in size and importance. Growth in the nation's population, international crisis, economic problems at home, citizens' demand for action, and the nature of bureaucracy itself. The last thing we'll talk about is client groups, and this kind of ties all of those things together with the Congress and the executive branch that we talked about before. Congressional committees, client groups, and a federal department or agency often cooperate closely to make public policy. Such cooperation creates what analysts have called an iron triangle. Interactions among agencies can also influence policymaking in the bureaucracy. So if you look at that chart on the right, it's pretty simple, but it gives you the example of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and the Department of Veterans Affairs, and then the American Legion, which is an interest group that rallies and fights for veterans issues. This is what we call a client group, that these three things, this committee in Congress, this department in the executive branch, and this interest group, are all fighting to help the same client base, which in this case is veterans. This can be the same thing for students with Department of Education and committees on education and maybe the National Education Association. Different things that set up what's called an iron triangle, meaning each of these parts of the government is fighting for the same client group, whether it's students or veterans or other client groups. And this helps to create policy for those groups and feeds into this bureaucracy. That is the end of the 3 sections on the executive branch. Please remember to ask any additional questions in class.